Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Hello, it is Wednesday, November 20th, and you know what? We're gonna get the scoop on Matt Gaetz. It is information is dribbling out. Mike Johnson, here's what I think is going on. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has said, well, this ethics investigation into Matt Gaetz, he resigned from Congress, so you know what, we'll just bury it. And there are even some Republican congressmen who don't want that to happen, but here's what I think Mr. Johnson is counting on. He does not want to be the one to release the report. He does not want to give his far-right members a reason to come after him. Remember, Mike Johnson is basically a big scaredy cat. He really is. He walks in fear of the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and of those of her ilk. He really does. So why do you think we don't have a budget? Oh, we'll extend the budget we have now for a few more months. Oh, we'll extend the budget we have for a few more months. Oh, well, we'll probably vote on an extension that'll take us past the inauguration. So he sure as heck doesn't want to be the one to release this report. However, there's been a news report that a hacker got a hold of the report and may soon be releasing it. Certain elements of the report, certain people who have given testimony, that seems to kind of be leaking out as well. Like the fact that the House ethics people were told that Matt Gaetz paid two women $10,000, and part of that money was remuneration for sex. We call that prostitution. When you pay somebody for sex, maybe it's not illegal everywhere in this country, but it's illegal in 99.9 places in this country. And I guarantee you in Florida it is illegal, if indeed that's where Mr. Gaetz, that's where supposedly a lot of these drug-fueled orgy parties happened. Matt Gaetz' buddy is, by the way, in prison for this. But because Matt Gaetz was smart enough and his buddy was stupid enough to put his buddy was stupid enough to put his name on everything and made the arrangements for allegedly for Matt, but there were no Gaetz fingerprints on anything. Nothing to tie him to these orgy parties where there were underage girls paid for sex. So his buddy's in prison. And he's not happy about it, the fact that Matt Gaetz is running around free. Anyway, I'm digressing. Let's get back to the point. We are going to find out what's in this report. Like I said, one news organization is already reporting that a hacker claims they got in somehow to the servers and they have a copy of it. But information about some of the testimony is being revealed, and Democrats in the Senate, forget Mike Johnson, forget this House report. There was a criminal investigation on these charges into Matt Gaetz before there was an ethics investigation. And Senate Democrats, including our very own Dick Durbin, have said to the FBI, you know what? We need to know what you found. We need you to share the documents from that investigation with us. They want the evidentiary file. They wrote a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray. That letter has shown up on Mr. Wray's desk today. So they want the evidence, they want the documents, they want to see transcripts of the interviews with a woman who said she was paid to have sex with Matt Gaetz when she was 17. The letter says, in part, the grave public allegations against Mr. Gates speak directly to his fitness to serve as the chief law enforcement officer for the federal government. The unanswered questions regarding Mr. Gates' alleged conduct are particularly significant given that his associate, Joel Greenberg, pled guilty to sex trafficking, the same charge for which Mr. Gates was also investigated. So, the Justice Department doesn't generally give Congress sensitive information on cases that are ongoing or closed. If the FBI were to do a background check on Matt Gates, the information would come into play then. But remember, Donald Trump is saying that he would prefer to have all of his appointees' background checks done by a private company, not the FBI. There have been calls for Joe Biden to reach out to the FBI right now and tell them to do background checks on these people. But as far as I know, and certainly as of yesterday, Mr. Biden had not done that. Maybe he's too busy flying to the rainforest to sit at a silly little desk in the middle of a bunch of greenery and then announce how he's doing all kinds of stuff for climate change. Yeah, he's in the rainforest signing papers about climate change. Well, the United States of America is coming apart at the seams. And yes, my good friend Edwin Eisendrath pointed out that with the technology available to the president, he can be just as presidential in Air Force One as he can be at the White House. But I haven't heard. You know, I don't know what the hell is going on with Joe Biden, the man who I was ready to follow to the bitter end. Maybe I'm going to be wonderfully surprised, and he's been doing lots of stuff behind the scenes that will suddenly come to light. And dear God, I hope that's the case, because I see a big bunch of nothing so far. And I'm sorry. I know that we, our station, our listeners, we were, until the very day he walked away, we were riding with Biden, and I was right there. But we have a 5-alarm fire right now. And honestly, it doesn't seem to me that Joe Biden is doing everything he could be doing on the way out. I'm hoping that there's a lot going on that isn't being talked about or isn't being mentioned in the press briefings. I hope that is the case. I really do. I want to, a week from now, I want to say, well, man, was I wrong? I should have known better. I should have had faith in Joe Biden. Shame on me. I hope next week I'm saying that to you. Because right now, I'm a little disappointed. You know, Joe Biden is a traditionalist. He likes to follow the rules. But you know what? So does Dick Durbin. And Dick Durbin is reaching out to the FBI and saying, you know what? This guy's up for a really important job. I don't care if you close the case. We need to know what's in that file. Dick Durbin isn't even sure he's going to run for re-election. He's still pondering it. But he's going to go down in a blaze of glory, I guess. Okay. We're doing the usual thing. I know I didn't give you the phone number. We are keeping the phone lines open here for the first hour. 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. Let's take a break. And I have more things to rant about when we come right back after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
Tom Hartman.
Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First, I just want to say thank you for being here for all of us. really important. It's almost like having a friend there that you know you can listen to and talk to. And I've listened to you since Air America, and I really appreciate you today.
Well, thank you, Lori.
The Tom Hartman Radio Program. Weekdays 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on WCPT 820, where facts matter. Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
773-763-9278. We are opening up the phone lines, though I do have more. I said Tuesday was going to be like Activism Tuesday. Every Tuesday I was going to try to come up with something that you can do, a lawmaker you need to reach out to. Apparently, Activism Tuesday is going to be followed by Cranky Wednesday. Because I got to tell you, most of the news that I read about this morning is just ticking me off. Let's go to the phone lines. Maybe Jim can calm me down a little bit. Jim, what do you have for me today?
Hi, Joan. What I was thinking about last night was a terrific movie by Peter Sellers, and Shirley MacLaine was a dean there, where Chauncey Gardner just watches television all night and all day. And through happenstance, he becomes president of the United States. But when he says something ridiculous like, "Oh, the world is a garden," everybody goes, "Ooh, that's a philosophical point," But he ends up as president, and this is similar to this maniac. But what kills me about this is the internet. I on the radio late at night, they had these two preachers. One from Ohio and one from Missouri. And they were talking about how evil the Democratic Party was and that they were pedophiles and the deep state and all this other stuff. And I thought, well, these people are really, I don't know what channel they've got on, but they're really, absurd, it's just an absurd conversation they'd have night after night after night. Well, one night they said they were eating cats and dogs, and on the internet they saw it, and they were talking about the two preachers. And then 2 days later, Trump mimics it at the presidential debate. And what's interesting is he follows this thread of absurd notions. And he's 80 years, going on 80 years old, Joe. And I mean, to trust that to the United States of America is just, I don't know what to say. It's just incredible that an individual like this can be running around the White House. And these picks, one are worse than the other. How about Bergman, the guy from South Dakota? He's going to take over energy and policy. The guy's been making money from oil his whole life. I mean, everybody is like an anti-individual for that particular job. And
I know. It's like, who is the least qualified person? Oh, let's see. Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset. I know. Let's put her in charge of intelligence.
Right.
At least Tulsi Gabbard, Jim, as far as I know, has not been accused of sexual assault. And because that kind of also seems to be a resume requement. Even this Linda McMahon from the World Wrestling whatever WWE, she's facing a lawsuit along with her husband that they looked the other way when they knew darn well one of their employees was abusing young boys. Because the argument is that there's no way they could have not known about it. So
That's a thread. That's just unbelievable. It seems to be running through the whole outfit. Him at the top, that's perfect. He's the perfect guy to do it. But you know another thing, Joan. We live on our diplomatic corps. And our diplomatic corps, please believe me, you've traveled enough. I've been to Europe enough. If you're in trouble, you've got to get to an embassy, U.S. embassy, no matter what it is. And you expect a welcoming American diplomat to understand your problem. And I remember the first impeachment, and some of the diplomats were saying that Rudy Giuliani was running over him with ridiculous information and threatening our jobs. And then, sure enough, Trump mimicked that. He was going to threaten some brilliant diplomats we had for 12, 20 years, And, they're nerve center for the United States of America. You know, I mean, you have to have that intelligence. And I don't know what he's going to do. I can't imagine what he's going to pick when he's picking these crazy people for these other positions.
I know. And it's, I don't understand it because he wants the Senate. He wants the whole government to go into recess so that he can just make these choices. And so he's asking the Senate, the Republican senators, to give up one of the main powers they have being in the Senate, and that is to confirm, to interview, to interrogate, and to decide whether or not to confirm certain people for certain offices. And if he had nominated people that were at least remotely qualified, or at least didn't have sexual assault convictions and Russian asset connections, I think the Senate would have acquiesced. But it's almost like he wants the Senate to be broken. You will kneel before me. You will grovel. You will not thwart me in any way. And not only am I going to ask you to give me recess appointments, but I am going to nominate the most ridiculous people, and you're still going to kneel and acquiesce and let me do it. It's like he wants to break them. Like if he can get them to do this, anything else, at least for the next 2 years, is going to be a piece of cake. And I don't know. He might just be going too far. I hope so. But Republicans have disappointed me time and time again when I think that they're going to finally stand up.
But his power has been enhanced by the Supreme Court. And also, remember this, he was in complete legal jeopardy. I mean, really astounding legal jeopardy. It's gone away. And he, just like these two ministers would talk every night, that this was all orchestrated by the Democratic Party and the illegal FBI agents and FBI agents that swore to the Democratic. But they believe this, Joan. They really believe this. That's what's so dangerous about this. And Trump believes it, too.
Yeah.
He believes that these people had conspired against him in the documents case, in overthrowing the government. How this guy ended up here, I have no idea. I just have no idea. And I can't even talk to my fellow citizens here because I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know where they're getting their information from. But if they just had surface information, you would neber vote for this person in a million years.
I saw a woman, I forget what state she lives in, but she was posting, because she had supported Kamala, and she was saying, I don't know who I can trust. I look at the other moms at school, and I think, who did you vote for? Did you vote secretly for Donald Trump? I don't know who I can trust. I don't know who I can talk to anymore. And it's we all kind of feel like we had the rug pulled out from under us, and that people who, we're now suspicious. We really are suspicious. And it's so interesting, Jim, just kind of as an aside here. One of my neighbors, who's an absolutely wonderful person, he actually was out of the country for the election, but before he left, he said to Ray that he was very worried about the election. And Ray was like, because we were all feeling pretty confident, he was like, oh, no, we got this. And my neighbor was like, I don't know. And then, it turned out he was right and we were wrong. And so when he got back into town, Ray asked him, why did you say that? I mean, clearly, you had a feel about something. And he said, I just think that there were a lot of people who, when they got in the voting booth, just couldn't find it in themselves to vote for a black woman. He said, I was very worried about that.
Yeah, so what's so the tragedy here is she's an absolutely brilliant person who had our best interest at heart. Anybody, to my mind, this is why one of the biggest reasons I voted for national health insurance is as I was a kid, as I first started voting. And whoever pushes that agenda forward, to me, is aces in my book. I know that FDR talked about it. If he would have lived, we might have gotten it then. But he didn't live, so that's another thing in history. But she actually talked about healthcare as a right, Joan. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's really a refreshing way to look at it.
And I don't know why this wasn't released earlier, Jim, but I saw somebody released, it wasn't a transcript, but it was like a synopsis of the conversation that she had with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I mean, she was tough with him. She told him that he thought that he had to stop the deaths and that, what he was doing in Gaza was too much and that he better plan on pulling it back and that too many people were dying. And like I said, it was a summary, not a transcript. But, man, it said he was really, really ticked off, but he, quote unquote, didn't dare say anything at the time because it looked like she was going to be the next president. So he kept his mouth shut. But he was not happy to hear what she had to say. And all those people who either stayed home or voted for Jill Stein because they didn't think Biden did enough and they didn't give the person who would have done more a chance. And it just breaks my heart.
Yeah, she was fabulous in my opinion. But look at Huckabee. Crazy Huckabee, the governor of Arkansas, he's going to be the liaison to the Middle East believe.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the same people who didn't want to support Democrats are now going, well, wait a minute. Well, Huckabee, wait a minute. He doesn't even believe that, Palestinians exist, that,
Right, exactly.
And they're like, wait a minute, this isn't what we wanted. Well, yeah, day late and a dollar short, kids.
Right. And he also believes, I read the last chapter of the Bible. He goes, I know how that ends. And it ends in the Middle East.
He calls it Samaria. He refers to it by ancient biblical names.
No, he's crazy as a bedbug. You know he's crazy as a bedbug. So is his daughter. What do you think the presser will be for Trump? I can't imagine the nut that they'll pick for that job. And what's the press going to ask? Silly questions like, why the Democratic Party? Why weren't they for the workers? Here Biden's on the picket line with the unionists. Come on, they know the history of the Democratic Party.
No, he's already picked his White House spokesperson. She's a 27-year-old, attractive, very attractive young person. When I first heard, Ray was like, what on earth is this? And I said, she's probably the child of some donor. Because that's, he likes to pay, he likes to repay people who have helped him out or done favors for him. I said, that's the only thing that I can think of because nobody's going to look at her and go, yeah, she's brilliant. Oh, my God. We got to get to a break.
I know, Joan. Take care, Joan. Thank you. Thank you, Joan.
We're going to be back with more calls and more news right after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Okay, we are taking your calls. We are talking about the news of the day. I'm going to get to all the calls. Don't worry, just hang on a quick second. But I wanted to share with you, our good friend Jeff Jackson, who's the congressman from North Carolina, the guy who was gerrymandered out of his congressional district. So he ran for attorney general from North Carolina, and he has won. He did one of his usual they're kind of like civics lessons. So he wanted to talk about what's coming up and these recess appointments and Matt Gaetz. And I wanted to share it with you because I think that it's very educational. And like I say, by the time all this comes around in the next Congress, he's not going to be there. He will be the Attorney General of North Carolina, but he was gerrymandered out of his congressional district. So this is his perspective on what is happening and what may happen in the future. Listen to Jeff Jackson.
Congress is back for the first time since before the election, so all the talk last week on the House floor was about who won and who lost until news broke about the president-elect's cabinet nominations. Some very controversial choices, but one in particular stood out to us in Congress because we know him, and that would be the nominee for Attorney General. In addition to being one of the most controversial members of Congress, he has also been under investigation by Congress for some really serious allegations, and the final report was supposed to come out last week. But right before it did, he was nominated to be our nation's next Attorney General, at which point he immediately resigned from Congress and now says that report can't come out because he's no longer a member. It's an open question how that's going to go. But the bigger question is, are these nominations going to be approved by the Senate, or is the plan to go around the Senate? And there is one way to do that, maybe two. First, if the Senate leaves town for more than 10 days, the president can pick whoever. It's called a recess appointment, but it hasn't happened for about a decade because every time the Senate leaves town, they pick a senator to stay behind for the purpose of calling the Senate back into session every few days just for a few seconds to make sure the 10-day clock restarts and no president can do an appointment without the approval of the Senate, which means the Senate would have to leave town and let itself go into recess just to allow the president to skip over them and install all of these people. It would be the Senate giving up one of its most powerful duties, the ability to confirm the president's cabinet. So let's assume they don't want to do that. That leaves another option, which has never been tried and would face a serious constitutional challenge. The Constitution says the president can adjourn both chambers of Congress, can send Congress home, but only under extraordinary circumstances and only if both chambers can't agree on when to go home. It's never been tried, but the next president could try to use that power to send Congress home, keep them home for 10 days, and at that point, fill his cabinet as he pleases. This would be immediately challenged in court, and maybe he would lose, but maybe he rolls the dice. Whatever path this takes, it won't happen until next year. That's when the new Congress takes over, which means I won't be there. I was just elected Attorney General in North Carolina, and that job starts in January. But I'm still in Congress for the next 2 months, and I will keep you posted.
Well, he won't keep us posted too much longer. They will be going home for the holidays, and then the new Congress is sworn in January 3rd, and man, oh man, that's when the rubber's going to hit the road. That is when the rubber is going to hit the road as far as these absurd, ridiculous, crazy, out-of-bounds nominations. We will see if the Senate has any backbone. We will see. Even if they decide to rubber stamp these people, I want them to go through the confirmation process. There are going to be more Republicans in the Senate than Democrats, so they have the power to put any choice of Donald Trump's in any office. Are they willing to give up at least the appearance of them doing their job, though? We will see. Let's go to the phone lines. Dave from Hoffman Estates is on the line. Hello, Dave. How are you?
Well, and yourself?
Oh, I'm cranky today, Dave. I'm a little cranky.
No, I couldn't tell.
You mean I'm always this bad? Oh, my goodness. Okay.
I got a couple quick points. I promise I ain't going to drag it out. I was reading, I was telling Lady B, where Sweden and Finland have been given pamphlets releasing new advice on surviving war. Telling the people to stockpile diapers, medication, baby food, bottled water, sanitary products, toilet paper, how to stop bleeding, dealing with anxiety, preparedness for pets, and iodine, if it's nuclear. And on the second point here, along with these 8 balls that you guys have been talking about, that Trump's picking so far, I'm wondering how soon will it be before he nominates the pillow guy, Mike Lindell, as drug czar.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that I can see that.
Well, he could, he could look like Al Pacino in Scarface by burying his face into a pile of coke and that, and he would be another one that Trump would be thumbing his nose at the norms of government, on choosing proper people. And
for those countries, that's a smart thing to do, but it really breaks my heart. It really does break my heart that, because I don't think that just came out of nowhere. Do you remember when Joe Biden first went back to a NATO meeting and he told everybody there, America's back? And I don't know if it was Angela Merkel or somebody said, but for how long? Man, oh man.
Yes, you're correct. Yeah, and
I'm so sorry they turned out to be right.
Yeah, and that way, with Getz and Lindell, you could always call them Beavis and Cokehead,
Yeah, yeah. Although I think, I thought it was more MDMA. That's I heard that was more the drug that was passed around. The one that Mr. Gates allegedly liked so much was MDMA, the drug that supposedly enhances sex.
But I was pointing more at the thing with Lindell, because that's what he was busted for, was cocaine and stuff.
Oh.
He was a cokehead. That's why I said Beavis.
I had forgotten about that.
Yes, and that's why you look at that. I don't know which character is which on that Beavis and Butthead, but he looks more like the one. So it sounded better, Beavis and Cokehead. But and close out with you do know who opened up Pandora's box by being the catalyst that got Trump to run for president in 2016.
Well,
none other than President Obama, when he humiliated and made fun of him at that. I think
that certainly had an influence. He's talking about the fact that at the White House press corps dinner, Obama made fun of Donald Trump. But there are operatives. Donald Trump was meeting with political operatives as early as 2014 to talk about what he would have to do if he were going to run for president. So, the mythology is that, Barack Obama humiliated him and that made him determined to run for president. And that may have kicked him into high gear. I don't know. But he was exploring a presidential run much earlier than that night.
Yeah. Well, I know he tried one time a few years before or something, and then he bailed out before it really got into. And he may have been a Democrat at that time. But have you read that Lev Parnas's book, The Shadow Diplomacy?
I haven't. Have you?
Yes, I'm in the process of going through it. But he talked about that Trump was scared more than anything on losing the 2020 election, more so than the 2016, because he had made it abundantly clear that he had no respect at all for those one-termers, kind of like George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, because it struck him as embarrassingly weak about getting a job and not being able to hold on to it. And his opinion was term limits were a stupid rule. Mm-hmm. He believed
he's already
you should
said
be able to
something
keep the job.
About something to the effect of, that his term is over in 2028 unless you guys decide you want to keep me.
Yep, that's what he said. He believed you should be able to keep the job as long as you possibly can, and he thought it as everybody's job to keep him in office for as long as you all could. So that... then we've heard him already say that he wants to be, a dictator only for a day, but he didn't say what kind of day. Doomsday.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me clear off. I know there's others been waiting. I just thought I'd share them a couple of.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you. We are going to take a real quick break, and then we're going to get to the rest of our callers right after this.
Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Join the conversation now at 773-763-9278.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You know, one of the folks who's going to be moving from Congress to the Senate in this new session is Andy Kim. He is the newly elected senator from New Jersey, the junior senator. Remember that picture after the January 6th melee? The very next day, Andy Kim was out on the floor of the rotunda with a bag, and he was collecting some of the garbage and debris that had been left on the Capitol floor. It was a haunting picture. He is now a senator. He is newly elected to the Senate and was being interviewed on cable news and was asked about some of these wild nominations that Trump is making for his cabinet. He doesn't refer to her by name, but at the beginning of this, he is clearly talking about Tulsi Gabbard because he's talking about intelligence and he's talking about who's going to be in the Situation Room when something happens. Andy Kim, New Jersey is so lucky to have him. He is so thoughtful. He's going to make a great senator. I want to share with you what he had to say when he was talking about some of these crazier Trump picks. Listen to this.
I just can't stand how much performative governance is now taking over so many of these nominees. I mean, so much of politics. You know, I've had the chance to work with some of these people in the House of Representatives. You know, I see people who are more interested in being social influencers rather than lawmakers. Mm-hmm. Like, I get to work a job. We get to work jobs whose job descriptions are in the Constitution of the United States. And then instead, you know, of trying to make the most of that, you know, we just see people chasing ego and ambition. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is just so very clearly this push right now to make America first mean America only when it comes to national security. And I think that question about what does American global leadership mean in this moment needs to be front and center at these nomination hearings to be able to understand what exactly are we going to see going forward, because it's very scary right now when we see just the inflection point that we're at as a country. What do I want to see in a leader that is sitting at that table of 13 chairs in the Situation Room with the President of the United States and be able to say, this is why this person is unqualified. This is why this is not a voice that we want to have in that place. That we recognize they all swear the same oath that I swear in the Capitol building, which is to the Constitution, not to a president, not to an individual. But what we worry about is just seeing, again, this awarding and rewarding of loyalists, you know, seeing how it is that we look at our partisan politics. I always say the last place that partisan politics belongs is in the Situation Room. Unfortunately, we are likely not going to see that kind of belief follow through with what we've seen so far with these nominations. And as someone who now has a vote in the United States Senate on that, I want to do my best to protect it.
That's newly elected New Jersey Senator Andy Kim talking about how some of these crazy appointments could play out down the road when there are really important decisions that need to be made. Let's go back to the phone lines. Greg from Lake in the Hills is on the line. Hey, Greg, how are you today?
Fine, Joan. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Good to talk with you again. You know, and just a shout out to Jim and Dave and whoever, all the fellow listeners and all that. And anyway, a special shout out to Stephanie, who's I know a long-time listener. She's called in a few times, and I'm like-minded with her. If you're listening, Stephanie. Anyway, the reason I called is, you know, like everybody else, I just totally appalled at what's could happen once this beast, Donald Trump, gets into his throne. And I think the only way I expressed it the other day, I'm not going to go into it. I think that there just has to be President Biden has to invoke the presidential power that allows him to say that there's a reason to issue martial law, and basically one of the ways he could do that would be to use the Secret Service to arrest Donald Trump, and then in concert with that go into a list of people that he would be well aware of through the FBI to arrest concurrently. Okay,
well,
but the
and
other thing
Greg,
I wanted to say
because of the Supreme Court ruling, if he fires Merrick Garland and Joe Biden, if he fires Merrick Garland and puts, I don't know, if he finds himself a toady like Donald Trump has in Matt Gaetz, then anything he does will be an official act. But see, I think you're thinking too small. I think he fires Merrick Garland, gets a toady in there, and then arrests the Supreme Court. I want to go right to the head of the snake. What do you think of that idea? Let's arrest the Supreme Court and charge them with treason.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they should have, several of them should have been impeached a long time ago. I think most people who followed that know that. But here's something that I wanted to put out there, too, that I'm a little more concerned of if Joe Biden doesn't act, is that one of the things that Donald Trump may be thinking of doing in concert with his master over in Russia is the people that he wants to deport. Wouldn't they be nice replacements or accessories to the recent acquisition of the North Korean soldiers to fight against the Ukrainians?
No,
how would they like
I don't
to do
think
that?
he would. Greg, I don't think he would trust immigrants to do that. But you do make an interesting point, because did you see where the leadership of the state of Texas has apparently reached out and said to Mr. Trump that they have this 1,400-acre plot of land, and if Mr. Trump wants to build one of his immigrant camps, one of his detention camps, why, they would be just honored and just pleased as punch if he would use their 14 acres to build this. So Texas is all in.
He would have the immigrant people build it too. And that's the way these guys think. But I'm going to let you go because I know you've got other people. But I worry about things like this because this guy is sadistic, and so is his master over in Russia. So that's all I have to say.
I worry about things like this too. Thank you, Greg.
Come on, Joe Biden. Come on, Joe. Come on, Kamala. Let's step up and do what we know you're capable of doing. Anyway, that's my last thought. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you, Greg. And just to be clear, I was being sarcastic with what I said. Not that I believe that any of you think that I really want the Supreme Court arrested, and Joe Biden would never violate the norms. And he never has. He never will. But what I would like to see is not a violation of any norms. I would just like to see Joe Biden do everything he can to shine a light on these folks. I know that there's sometimes people are like, well, why doesn't Joe Biden, like for an example, why doesn't Joe Biden fire Louis DeJoy? Joe Biden doesn't have that power. Louis DeJoy can only be fired by the board. And there were a couple of empty seats on the board, but I do not believe that there is a Democratic majority on that board. So some things we want Joe Biden to do, he simply doesn't have the power to do them. I've not heard anybody say, though, that President Biden doesn't have the power to order the FBI to do background checks. Donald Trump has said publicly that he wants to circumvent the FBI. He does not want the FBI doing a background check on Matt Gaetz. He does not want the FBI doing a background check on Tulsi Gabbard. He probably doesn't want the FBI doing a background check on Bobby Kennedy Jr. either. He has said, not that he won't have somebody look into their background, but, he would rather hire a private firm to do that. And what do you think that means? Do you think he will hire a private firm that will do anything other than whitewash these people? No, you know that. I know that. And frankly, Joe Biden should know that. And if it is within his power, even if it's not within his power, I think he should announce it anyway. And then if the Republicans want to take him to court and say, he's exceeding his power, then we can fight about it there. But at least he will go on the record as saying, we need to know whether or not these people pose a risk. Forget about whether or not they're fit for office. We know they are not fit for office. The question is, how closely is Tulsi Gabbard connected to Putin? It's already been established that other countries, if Tulsi Gabbard is the director of national intelligence, other countries are not going to be sharing their intelligence with us. They're just not. They're smart enough not to trust her. And I hope, Donald Trump talks about the deep state. The deep state, as our good friend Mark Jacob is pointing out in his most recent newsletter, you know what the deep state is? The deep state is our bureaucracy, the civil servants who do the work day in and day out, whether a Republican or a Democrat is in charge, the bureaucrats who go about the business of their agency. That's what Donald Trump calls the deep state. Why does he call them that? Because they want to follow the laws and follow the rules and follow the norms instead of just blindly doing what Donald Trump wants them to do and tells them to do. Therefore, they are thwarting his will. Therefore, they are some sort of deep state conspiracy to prevent him from doing what he wants to do. Not the actual framing, which is they are people who follow the law, and when he wants something that is illegal, they don't want to do it. No. So the deep state could potentially end up saving us. But the bureaucracy that is our national intelligence network, if they feel that Tulsi Gabbard cannot be trusted with secrets and she is the head of the agency, if she's head of national intelligence, they're going to have to, in the interest of protecting the country, they are going to have to be very careful what they share with her. The director of national intelligence should know everything. Who's doing what, where, all the players, all the informants. You think Tulsi Gabbard can be trusted with that kind of information? You think that information won't make its way to Russia? We're in a bit of a pickle, kids. I hope that the Senate, in the interest of at least continuing the appearance that they have power, I hope the Republicans in the Senate insist on confirmation hearings. And I hope that in the course of those confirmation hearings, so much bad stuff comes out about Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard that even the most diehard Trump supporter will be too embarrassed to vote for them. Maybe that's a fantasy. I've been staggered before by the cowardice exhibited by Republicans. As you know, with some of the people I've talked to since the election, there are some people who feel that since with this election Donald Trump is no longer legally, constitutionally permitted to run again, that makes him a lame duck, and that maybe, just maybe that will give them a little bit more courage. The person who said that told me that probably for the first year, they will capitulate to everything Trump wants. And then after that, maybe they'll start resisting. Who knows? Let's take a break for news. We're going to be back with much more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
The reason that I listen to you from the infamous other side, you will call a spade, and if it's indefensible, you will not defend it. And you know what? I can respect that.
On WCPT 820.
You know, with things being so, let's just use the word bad, in this country right now, with what we're living through and with what it looks like we are going to be living through in the very near future, it is a time when some folks have actually looked to our past. I was talking with somebody right after the election, and I was like, oh, my God, it's never been this bad. And they were like, well, actually, yeah, not only has it been this bad before, it has been worse in our history. One incident that I don't think many of us know about. I mean, it took a while before the Tulsa massacre came to light, where a thriving black economic community was just razed and burned. There was another similar occurrence in Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898. And right now you're thinking to yourself, I don't recall reading or being taught anything about that. Yeah, because we weren't. It was kind of forgotten. But what happened, these incidents in our past when horrible things have happened, it's important for us to know about that, to acknowledge it, to look into what happened and why, and maybe learn from it, and also to realize that we have been to some very, very dark places in this country. There is a series on PBS called American Experience. And as part of American Experience, American Coup, Wilmington, 1898, is going to be a part of the American Experience. It is streaming right now on pbs.org. Directors of American Coup, Wilmington, 1898, Yoruba Richin and Brad Lichtenstein are here right now to tell us this incredible story that I'm willing to bet nobody out in the audience knows about. I read this and I was like, wait a minute, how could this have happened and none of us ever heard of this? Well, you're going to hear about it now. Yoruba, Brad, thank you so much for being here today to tell us about this.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'd like, let's, Yoruba, why don't you start and tell us just exactly what did happen back in 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina?
Well, Wilmington, the events of Wilmington, 1898 in North Carolina, it's considered the most successful political coup that's happened in this country, and there was a massacre as well. And it's important to know that Wilmington was a thriving town on the ports, very prosperous, the biggest city in North Carolina at the time, majority African American. These were folks who came one generation after slavery had ended and were part of Reconstruction, the period of Reconstruction. And this was, as I said, a thriving town where African Americans had businesses, they were in professions, they competed against white business owners for goods, for selling goods. And they also lived in each other, relatively, in some parts, integrated communities. And what happened was that in a few years before the coup in the 1880s, the black Republicans were the party of Lincoln, and most black people were Republicans, and white populists, those who were disaffected from the Democratic Party, which was the white party of elites, formed an alliance and created a fusion ticket where a multiracial fusion ticket where they were elected to local and state government. The governor was also a fusion candidate. And these politicians put in policies that were actually, helpful for the people and were making progress for the people. Because of this, the white supremacists, that's what they called themselves, they're self-named white supremacists, wanted to destroy this, felt threatened by this. And wanted to destroy the fusion government. And they created a plan, very deliberate plan, to take over the government, and this was planned by local business owners, Chamber of Commerce, and perpetrated by many newspapers, including Josephus Daniels, who was the publisher of the News and Observer. And they created a racist tropes. They didn't create it. They used racist tropes to spread fear and disinformation about blacks taking over government, incompetent rule, and also black men raping white women. And they were able to meticulously plan the coup and the takeover of the government, and then massacred many people, as the numbers are not, known because it wasn't documented, and drove black people and their allies, their white allies, out of the city. And so subsequently, Wilmington turned from a majority black to majority white city, and 2 years later, Jim Crow was instituted. And you said, as you said, this was buried, or this was forgotten, but it was really buried. They were very proud of what they did. It was, again, documented in all the papers, celebrated even, but then it was buried. And that is why most people do not know about the events of 1898.
Brad, how do you bury something like this, especially when, first of all, it makes me very sad to hear that the newspapers of the time were a part of this. I know that newspapers have always been accused of being biased and partisan. It's something that I've tried to defend, but clearly some are more partisan or have been more partisan than others. But how on earth could something that's been written about, newspapers were published, this wasn't something that at least initially was being hidden. Brad, how does something like this just disappear?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very overwhelming answer, which is a few things. One is, if you remember, the largest newspaper in the state, the News and Observer, which Yoruba mentioned, was run by a man, a publisher and editor, Josephus Daniels, who was not even pretending to try to deliver objective news. They were a mouthpiece for the white supremacy campaign, and they published article after article and cartoons, since even the white population was 60% illiterate, cartoons that would traffic in these racist tropes and stoke fear in order to undermine the fusion government. So that was one piece. Then when the actual coup and massacre was taking place, to the extent that journalists were coming to Wilmington to follow it, they were greeted by the white supremacists, who, remember, were the town fathers. They were the people who were members of the Chamber of Commerce. They were not a deranged splinter group at all. They were the town leaders. They welcomed all of these journalists. They gave them whiskey and cigars and basically wined and dined them, and they were the ones who showed them the story that they wanted told. And they were the ones who said that this was a riot, that it was started by black people, that the white supremacy position was justified, and that's the story they got told. And then while it's true that some of the perpetrators bragged about their success, their violent success, for a little while, soon after, maybe 1904, 1905, the entire story starts to get buried because the city realizes that it should be ashamed of what had happened. And when we say buried, we mean that false accounts were codified into the textbooks that this history was taught in North Carolina. And the false narratives were the only narratives out there, with the exception of black newspapers. But the reach of the black newspapers was not nearly as, as extensive in white readership as it was in black leadership. So, eventually the narrative was that there was a riot and that there was good government restored by the Democratic Party. And that is the story they got told, really, until a woman in Wilmington and some of her allies, Bertha Todd, started to stir up plans to have a commemoration and a kind of public hearing of what had happened in Wilmington when the centennial in 1998 was approaching, so 100 years later. And that was the beginning of a process that, we came into when we started making this film and started meeting descendants at the commemoration of the events, that many years later, at that point, 123 years later. So it takes a long time to unbury the past, especially when it was deliberately buried so deep.
But one thing, you said that as soon as like 1904, 1905, they started rewriting the history and trying to codify a different story. That's like 5 years after it happened. But you said at the time it happened, the people who did it were completely okay with it, even perhaps proud of what they had done. What happened in 5 years? Did they look around at the rest of the world and go, oh, maybe we shouldn't be bragging about this. Maybe this doesn't reflect well on us. It seems like I understand people looking back on an event and saying that shouldn't have happened. But generally, especially if it's an event that was so carefully planned and orchestrated and crowed about afterwards, 5 years seems like a pretty fast turnaround to then be embarrassed by it. Was there something that happened?
That's a really good question. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead, Yuriba. Oh, okay.
I was going to say, I don't think we know the answer to that.
I don't know that we know the exact answer.
Yeah, we don't know the exact answer, but all I can say though is I think there are other examples in history that we have where that kind of turnaround very quickly happens. And it wasn't just buried, it was also rewritten, okay? So it wasn't just like, we're not going to talk about it. We're going to call this a race riot. We're going to say that blacks fired first. And these are some of the headlines that came out, about in the textbooks that Brad mentioned, and in the subsequent articles about the event. So it was not only burying it, it was turning it around, twisting it as well. But to your question, I don't know. I don't think we know why they started to bury it, but I think we've had other instances where that has happened, where a turnaround on how these terrible events are seen happens pretty quickly.
Go ahead, there's also a workforce issue too that may have been a factor. remember, Wilmington was 56% black the day before the massacre. Afterwards, it dramatically shrunk. I don't know the exact number at that moment. We don't know because census records are a little spotty. But we know today, for instance, Wilmington is only 16% black.
Wow.
There was such a mass exodus, both through banishment and just families, very clearly wanting to move somewhere where they were safer. And we see in the record that some of the white supremacists started to invite black people back, and also to divide and conquer, to try to say, oh, the bad black people were chased out of town, but we want all of the good black people back. And part of that is because of workforce, because they needed all these people that were building wealth in the first place by working in the docks. It's a port town, working in the forest to bring turpentine and other forest products to the market. All of that was still vital to their economy. So that's probably part of the factor, too.
You guys have a documentary. A documentary usually means that there is, footage. What kind of footage is in your documentary to describe and illustrate the story?
Yeah, well, we knew from the beginning that footage was going to be an issue. They weren't documenting the coup as it was happening, even though at that time cameras were widely available, still cameras, not film cameras. So we knew we had to be creative with the how we were going to visually tell this story. And besides having an incredible team that did work to sort of scrape the archives, the libraries, churches, newspapers for pictures, we also worked with an amazing graphic designer to come up with a sort of visual motif of animation of how we would animate certain parts of the story. And that animation was inspired by the artist Kara Walker, who does these silhouette cutouts in the antebellum, from the antebellum period mostly. And then also the horror movie Candyman, the most recent version, and that also used sort of silhouette hand puppets. And we were inspired by both the visual of that and also the, having this horror theme, because it really is a horror story, and using the work of Kara Walker. So that was one of the things that we did very early on to start figuring out how we were going to visually tell this story.
Wow. I know that your documentary premiered on PBS November 12th and is streaming on pbs.org. What do people need to do to find it?
Really, if you just Google American Coup, pbs.org, or Google Watch American Coup Wilmington 1898, and you'll see there's other ways to watch it as well. It's streaming on Amazon through the PBS banner. It's also streaming or available through Comcast. So there's a lot of ways to watch it, and we hope people will, and hope people will also find settings to watch it in groups or friends, because it's a vital part of history that almost nobody really knows about.
How long is the documentary?
It's almost 2 hours. It's an hour and 51 minutes. And that seems like a lot of time, but honestly, we had to cut out a lot in order to tell the story. But it's a story that is so sweeping because we start in trying to paint a portrait of the community so that we understand what was at stake and what was lost. And then the coup really takes place in two stages. There's the intimidation that kept black voters away from the polls, so much so that it was startling. I can't quite quote the exact number, but I believe the number was in nearly in the tens of thousands who voted in the previous election, and it was reduced just to a few hundred.
And when you say intimidation, I assume you mean the threat of physical violence?
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't one of those, well, we're going to have a poll tax and we're going to, restrict the number of hours that you can vote, and this is actual...
that came after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Those are the modern-day methods.
Yeah. This was literally enlisting the shock troops, the red shirts, who were a group of people who did the so-called dirty work for the elites who orchestrated the coup. And they were all over the city in every single area or community or neighborhood, making sure that people did not feel comfortable going out to vote. And then those who did vote, they had their votes literally pulled out of ballot boxes and replaced with fake ballots.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was thorough.
Okay. Knowing how bad this was, does that make the two of you feel better about the badness we're facing now? Or does it make you realize that the badness we're facing now could get this bad? I need to know.
There's a lot of bad.
There's a lot of bad. Too many bads in that sentence.
A lot of bad in that sentence. I think and having done, done a few historical films, understanding that there are echoes of the past in our current political situation and our current society, and especially when it comes to dealing with these, or not dealing, as the case may be, with these racial, these racial terror, structural racism in this country. Because we have not had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to unbury this past, these echoes keep happening. And that's really what becomes very clear to me again and again, that we find ourselves in these situations where these unresolved issues are still with us. And I think it's important to understand how a film, events like Wilmington, also how events like Wilmington, which is not that long ago, let's point out, how that, it's an understanding of what how this country was founded and how wealth was built, how wealth was stolen. And it helps us understand our present.
Yeah. It absolutely does. Did you have, I know we don't have much time left, did you have trouble finding relatives of those who lived through this?
Well, we were really fortunate when we began. We learned about a group called Coming to the Table, which has a chapter in Wilmington. It's a group that really started out of the coming to the table between the black and white descendants of Jefferson Davis. But in this context, they were talking about the descendants of the massacre. And so we met a few of the descendants that way, who graciously let us tell their stories. And then we started to reach out and try to see if other, particularly white descendants, would be willing to participate in the film. Because, as Yoruba said many times, one of the things is that we often see black families when we're telling these horrendous stories. And it's important, of course, to hear from them. But like in the Tulsa story, we rarely have ever heard from the white perpetrators. Mm-hmm. And it's important for us to understand how is this history being told within the confines of their own families? What stories are they telling themselves? And, what we discovered was, with some of the white descendants who participated, that, in fact, their families either downplayed this or, suggested that their family had not been part of it. Mm-hmm. But, the record told a different story. And, of course, we applaud them for coming forward and for being part of this accountability process. And there were plenty of white descendants who declined to talk to us as well. So it also shows just how potent history is in the present.
Well, I think what you've done is amazing. And I love it when people tell stories that nobody's ever heard of before. And I think that really adds to our sense of who we are, where we've been, and where we're going. Yoruba Richin and Brad Lichtenstein are the directors of this PBS doc, American Coup, Wilmington, 1898. You can find it streaming on pbs.org. Thank you guys for coming and talking about it.
Thank you so much.
We are going to take a break. We are going to be back with more right after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Every morning here on WCPT at 5 a.m., we hear Rick Smith, The Rick Smith Show, airing right before Richard Chu takes the helm at 6 a.m. Rick is always an interesting person to talk to about particularly government and labor issues, but he has also been going through a very personal situation that he has shared on social media. His wife, Carol, was gravely injured in a traffic accident, and Rick has been keeping us updated on how her recovery is going. Rick Smith joins us now. Rick, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Joan. Thanks. I appreciate it. On September 12th, my wife was involved in a motorcycle accident. A woman driving a van just turned left and basically ran her over. And we didn't have much hope that she was going to make it, but she's a fighter and she's in there fighting every day. And we were taking the little wins, and we're guardedly optimistic that Mom's going to be coming home very soon and healing and being back to normal. Back to who she was, and we had a big day today. Surgery, got some pins taken out of her fingers and her wrist, so that's a huge win. So we're hopeful.
She broke a lot of bones, didn't she?
Oh yeah, she broke everything on the right side of her body. Compound fracture of the femur, compound fracture of the ulna and radius, broke the forearm in both bones of the forearm in 7 places, tibial plateau split in half. I mean, lots of really, really horrible stuff. But all that's going to heal. Our big concern is cognitively, because she had a serious brain injury. She has a traumatic brain injury, and we won't know for a year or more, what returns. And we're, but look, ultimately we're thankful that she's here with us, and we got a shot to lead a normal life, or the life that we had planned together. So yeah. I'm really, and I want to thank everybody, because we've gotten cards from people and notes and emails and texts and all kinds of stuff from people all across the country. Just sharing their love, sharing their thoughts and prayers. They're good vibes, they're good juju, whatever. But I want to throw that out and thank everyone. It's meant an awful lot to the family, and it will mean an awful lot to Carol when she scrapbooks this entire event.
Yeah. Well, the good news is it wasn't all that long ago that neurologists were of the opinion that, whatever you were going to recover, you were going to recover in 6 months and after that. And then there were people who kept getting better and kept recovering. And, as long as they were stimulated and were doing the work. And so that they don't say that anymore. You're right. It's a long haul, and sometimes the victories are small. But for at least the next couple of years, there's every possibility that Carol is going to continue to regain and regain and regain.
Yeah, and look, we're going to give her every opportunity, because I'm very fortunate. And I say this, being grateful that I'm extremely privileged in that. I have a union job with union health insurance. We have never had a problem with any of the things that she needs. Our insurance covers it. Whatever's going to happen down the road will happen. I have a job that I don't worry about losing. I have a callback that could last as long as I need. I don't worry about the stress. Had a little savings because I do have a good union job that affords me the ability to have a good nest egg. So I'm extremely privileged because I can't imagine if I had those other stresses on top of all of this, figuring out how to be Mr. Mom now and figuring out how to do all of these other things that I've never had to do before, as well as take care of my wife. I don't know how I would deal with it, and I am eternally grateful to my union and to the representatives who represent in the company that I work for honoring the contract. But for me, this is another one of those reasons that you become a member of a labor union, that in times of crisis, in times of turmoil, there's someone going to be at the bat for you. And I like I said, I'm grateful to my Teamsters union for that.
But we have recently elected someone to the White House who has made no secret of the fact that he is no fan of unions. He put a union buster as head of the NLRB last time around, and I don't believe we can count on him for anybody better this time around. I'm a union member, lifelong union member like you, and I know that we just have to live through 4 years or maybe even just 2 years if we can retake one or both of the houses. But, Rick, I think unions are really going to find themselves under fire.
Oh, without question. If you look at Project 2025, they were very clear in what they want to do. And for all those people who said, no, Rick, Project 2025, that's not Donald Trump's agenda. Nonsense. It is the agenda. It is what they're moving. And, I keep saying that, and I've been saying this on the show, the solutions will come out of the suffering. The solutions will come out of the savagery of what they're going to do. There's an old labor saying, sometimes your head gets right when your stomach gets empty. And I fear we're going to head to that moment because, as Elon Musk said, we're going to need some temporary people being uncomfortable for a while so that we can get things the way that we want them, which is, going back to the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s. We've heard Trump talk about how much he liked the 1880s and the policies and the trade laws and all the stuff of that era. But what he really liked about it is that's the robber baron era. That's when the billionaire class controlled virtually everything. And working people were subservient, in their place, docile, and, oh, by the way, exploitable. And that's where they want to put us back to. They need a good crisis to put working people back in their place. The Elon Musks of the world, we got to get those remote workers back to work. It really is about putting uppity workers back in their place. People like me.
Yeah, you and me both, kiddo. One of the things, speaking of Elon Musk, I think the only thing that I'm hoping for is that the two narcissists will eventually clash and their bromance will come to a bad end. And, man, I am so looking forward to that day.
No, we're taking bets on who throws who under the bus first. Will it be Trump or will it be Musk? Because look, Trump obviously going to be the president. He's got the megaphone, but Elon Musk bought Twitter. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out because Musk, in the Department of Government Efficiency that takes two people to run.
Because I'm
not quite sure how him and Vivek are going to get along. I'm not sure how that uncomfortable marriage will get along. But also, they don't have any power. There's nothing
it's
they can
completely
do.
Advisory.
It's a suggestion box.
They're the only ones who call it a government agency. It's basically, what are we going to do with these two guys that we don't really want, but we don't want to make them mad? So let's make up a job and make it sound important and give it to them. I don't know. I think that's how that conversation went down.
It's a suggestion box. And, ultimately, they name it Doge after Musk's Bitcoin because, you got to appease him however you have. This is what happens when you have people who are so wealthy that they can strong-arm government. And this is dangerous. Working people should be very afraid of what they've done, because this administration is going to be the CEO administration. This is going to, all those people who say, I want a good businessman in charge of government, well, you're going to see what business government looks like. You're going to see what happens when you put people in charge of your government who grab a quarter and the eagle screams. You're going to see people suffer and struggle. And the question then for me is, look, we've crossed a lot of lines over the last couple of years that I thought we wouldn't cross as a society. But the one that I've always said is we're never going to let people just die on the street corners. We're not going to let people who need health care die because of whatever reason. We're not going to let Granny freeze in her home. We're not going to let children starve. But I don't know that anymore. And I'm looking at this administration of what's being talked about, and I have to question, when we look inside ourselves, are we willing to let Granny freeze to death in the wintertime because they're going to gut lie heap? Are we willing to let children go hungry because they're going to go after child, hunger programs and food stamps and all of that?
Well, they've already, that's already been what Donald Trump has said.
Right.
These tax cuts, we got to pay for them somehow. So let's look at going after Medicaid, reducing those benefits and who's eligible, getting rid of food stamps, and any kind of other social safety net programs. I mean, we had this experience when we had Governor Bruce Rauner here in Illinois. Oh, we want a businessman. We want somebody who's really going to make, Illinois run efficiently. And then you started hearing from people, oh my God, he's cutting programs that my family uses. He's cutting, we didn't think he was this. We didn't think this is where he was going to find his cuts. Nobody told us he was going to cut our stuff.
Exactly. But here's the thing, as I said a moment ago, the solutions will come out of the suffering. The savagery that they're going to inflict on us, that's what the solutions will come out of, because there's an opportunity for us to reach out to those red hats and those Trump supporters who are going to be harmed, and not in a way that we rub their nose in it, but in a way of going, hey, what do we want? Because understand, this election was not a mandate for Trump.
No.
This was an anger election. This is people are struggling. People are having a hard time putting food on the table, keeping a roof over their head because rents are crazy, because we've corporatized rentals, the food supplies, in a handful of corporations, and they're gouging us to no end. And people didn't feel, Democrats didn't feel that anyone was doing enough for them. This was not Republicans' win. This was a Democratic loss. Trump didn't get any more votes than he got the last time around. It's just that the Democrats didn't come out to vote. So for me, the message here is, how do we reach those Democrats for one, but also how do we peel some of those working class Trump voters who are disillusioned by a system that hasn't helped them in the last 30 or 40 years.
I want to talk to you about that more in depth, but we need to take a real quick break. I'm talking to Rick Smith from The Rick Smith Show. You hear it here on WCPT every day at 5 a.m. We're going to be right back after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Attention, everyone.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by Rick Smith of The Rick Smith Show. You hear him every morning here on WCPT at 5 a.m. We were just talking about Democrats and how they could potentially win back working class voters. I know this is something you've given a lot of thought to, Rick. What would be your advice?
Well, look, I think Joe Biden was moving us in that right direction. I just don't think they did enough to talk about what they were doing and have it filtered down to people, and it didn't happen fast enough. Look, I think investing in infrastructure is a huge, huge driver of jobs. I think investing in reshoring manufacturing, a huge driver of employment, and then making sure that those jobs are union jobs with good wages, solid health care benefits, retirement security, all of those things that make really the secret sauce that built my grandparents' generation. And I thought Biden was moving in that direction. I thought had he gotten another term, or at least the policies have gotten another term, I think we would have been in a much better place. Sadly, the anger of a lot of Democrats not going to give him that opportunity or those policies the opportunity. Instead, we're going to make sure that transgender people can't go to the bathroom. And these are the solutions that Republicans are going to be shoving down our throats. Because understand, Walmart and a lot of the big retailers are saying, well, we're going to start raising prices preemptively because Trump's going to bring in those broad-based tariffs.
They've already made that announcement.
Sure, but here's the thing, and what bothers me is that they're going to use that as an excuse, whether it's true or not. They're going to use it as an excuse to raise prices even higher, and they're going to do it before Trump takes office, so they can blame Biden for it and the Democrats for it. Because they rose it before we took office, even though it was their policies. And this is the thing that drives me insane about our voters, because everyone blames Bill Clinton for NAFTA, and yes, he signed it. But the Democrats did not. The majority of Democrats didn't vote for it. The majority of Republicans did. It was fully negotiated by H.W. Bush. It would have been signed regardless of which party was in power. It was birthed under Reagan, but we never talk about that. And for me, the problem is our media culture is so bad, and it's going to get worse now that the quote-unquote liberal media is kowtowing to Donald Trump. You saw Mika and what's the guy's name?
Joe.
Heading down to Mar-a-Lago. Let me, if I could for a second, when did the liberal media when did the liberal media be a Republican congressman? When did that happen?
Yeah, good question.
But, the reality is it's why your program is so important, and programs like mine are, that we talk about what is affecting working people. Because, my audience, when people contact me, we have actual conversations about, people struggling and what policies would make things better. I believe our government should be that place where we do those things collectively that we can't do individually, like ensuring that people get health care, people get an education, people have the ability to get affordable housing or rent. What policies are the Republicans moving that will help any of those things? Did you see who the Secretary of Education is going to be?
Yes, the woman from WWE, Linda McMahon.
Exactly. You go. Did you see who's going to be in charge of Medicare and Medicaid?
Mehmet Oz.
Dr. Quack.
Yep.
You go. So this is going to be a circus on its face and on purpose, because we're going to be blinded by the chaos while they destroy and rob us blind. It's important that people like you, me, programs like on WCPT and the other affiliates that we have, that they keep their eye on the prize, which is ensuring that working people get things that they need. Because understand, the $1 a gallon gas, it ain't coming back. The 99-cent eggs that we were told we were going to get, I got listeners who truly believe on January 21st, gas is going to be $1 a gallon, eggs are going to be 99 cents. Because that's what they were told by a very powerful right-wing megaphone.
Yep.
And it's our job, when that doesn't happen, to say, hey, you were lied to. Here's reality. Here's how we get to a better place. And I think that's part of what has to happen over the next couple of months.
There was a really interesting article that was written about the election in the New Yorker that talked about how a lot of voters who voted in this election sort of based their decisions on sort of what they heard and what they felt. They called it like something like the ambience of news, as opposed to actually, knowing any facts. And that, we've got to realize that there's a lot of people who voted in this election a big demographic had a sixth grade or less education, and that what they found was that the things they heard, that's how they made up their mind. But once they had made up their mind, they really only sought out things that confirmed what they already believed to be true, and that's tough. That's tough to go up against. It really is.
Well, the reality is, I go back to when I started my show almost 20 years ago. It started because a union brother of mine said, we'd make more money here if there was no union here. And I turned to him and I said, well, where on the planet, where in this country is that happening? If that's true, and I'm not calling you a liar, but if that's true, why aren't you there? Why are you here?
And what did he say?
A day later, he came back to me. And he said, I thought about what you said, and you're kind of right. I got caught up in what I heard on the radio. Because he was listening to right-wing blather morning to night. Because, the goal of my program was to add a little balance to the airwaves, was to give another side, to talk about things from a working-class perspective. Because ultimately we get the corporate side day in, day out. There's a business page in every newspaper. I'm old enough to remember when newspapers had labor pages, but that's a long time ago.
I don't remember that, and I'm as old as you, if not older than you.
Sure.
Labor pages?
The Cleveland Press had a labor section.
Huh.
Every major newspaper had a labor
Dealer?
reporter. The Cleveland Press. The Cleveland Press went out of business back in the late 70s. But they had a labor page. The New York Times had Stephen Greenhouse as their labor reporter. And if I could, real quick, for all the people who know Stephen, and I'm wishing him and his family just sympathies and condolences. His wife was killed here recently in an accident in New York City. So I want to send some thoughts and prayers out to him. But, you said Philip Dine was, in St. Louis. There were labor reporters across this country, and they've all been wiped out. But there's still the business page there. And what's happened is we get one side of every issue. So when I started this program, it was about talking about things from a different point of view, a different perspective. And as I say all the time, one of the greatest compliments I get is I may not agree with you, but you made me think of something a different way.
Huh.
And that's what I think our job is to do, to present the argument from a working class perspective of people who have walked a mile in our shoes, and do that in a way that's honest, that's forthright, and that is no BS. And that's what I think we do here. But I don't doubt what you've said. I don't doubt that report of what you pointed to, because the right has been spending enormous amounts of money talking to working people, building relationships through, you name the show, you name the podcast, you name the network. Mm-hmm. Democrats, Labor, the left, they haven't done that. Maybe Rachel Maddow. But name someone outside of Rachel Maddow who would be anywhere near a Joe Rogan or a Bongino or a Timcast or Hannity or, go down the list of the crazies. This is why I think the left, Labor, Democrats have to invest in talking to people. And reaching out and having conversations, not just a couple of months before an election, but year-round, every day, being partners with them and people that they identify with. My audience identifies with me. I'm a working-class guy. I punch a clock just like they do.
Conservative media that owns at least half a dozen cable channels. Sinclair owns over 200 local TV stations. iHeartMedia, how many thousands of radio stations across the country? I mean, even in Chicago, there's a handful of conservative radio stations. There's us. Do you think that we as Democrats need to start thinking, whether it's podcasts, whether it's YouTube channels, whether it is radio or local televisions, do you think we need to try to get on a par with the far right, or do you think it's already too late?
Did you say start thinking? I had a conversation with somebody I've been telling this to for 18 years. 18 years, we have the same conversation. I said, I need you as a sponsor. Well, we really can't. And here's why. I said, look, ultimately, if you're not talking to people, you're losing them. And we've lost the working class. There's a way to get them back. And it's this moment as what they've been sold. what Trumpism is not going to make their lives better. The policy that's going to go through major tax cuts for rich people, not going to make working people's lives better. In fact, if he does go through with the tariffs, going to make working people's lives worse. So for me, there's an opportunity in this if, Democrats, labor, the left, whatever, start building platforms with the idea that we're building relationships with people. It's not about profit. It's not about making big money. It's about reaching people. It's about building community, and it's about figuring out how we take this wonderful experiment of self-rule and self-governance and make it work for all of us, and not just the handful of billionaires who have been robbing us blind for decades.
That's what's so extraordinary to me. It is so apparent to you and to me that the current iteration of the Republican Party just doesn't care a whit about the middle class, or, God forbid, anybody who's not even in the middle class. I mean, and they're not hiding it. They didn't hide it. And yet somehow there were so many middle class voters who were like, yep, that's my guy. That Project 2025, oh yeah, that's what I want in government. I just don't understand what it seemed to me to be people voting against their self-interest.
Well, I mean, again, I made a joke about at least there won't be any transgender people in the bathrooms. It's because we've been fed this kind of nonsense. And when you're fighting over nonsense, you're going to get cheated out of sense. And what's happened to us is they've given us this chum in the water, and we're too busy eating that instead of paying attention to what's really important. And it's the economics. It's always the economy, stupid. It's always how you're going to make people's lives better. And where I think Democrats have fallen down over the years is we brought identity politics to a class war. And I've had this conversation with people for years who have told me, I'm the first this, that, the other thing, and I'm running for the because I believe, in these issues. And I go, that doesn't help me a bit. I don't care about your sexual resume. I don't care about any of that stuff. I care about what are you going to do for me and my neighbors? What policies are you going to move as a representative of we the people? Because I view politicians as tools. They're not saviors. And the sad reality is on the Democratic side, they see politicians as saviors. We get behind a Colin Allred or Amy McGrath or a Jamie Harrison, and we throw huge amounts of money at them, and they get crushed as they were going to anyway, because we fell in love with the idea that we were going to take out Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz. Instead of going, hey, how do we pull those people together into a group that understands they're just tools? Mm-hmm. Politicians are just tools to get the things done that we need. And if they don't get the things we need done, they go, and we bring other ones in. Yep. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not making people's lives better, you're just making them angry. And this election was really all about the anger of the working class.
Rick, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Give my best to your lovely wife, Carol, and your family. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all you do.
Thanks so much, Joan. Thank you. Always great talking with you.
We are going to take a break for news. We're going to be back with much more after news.
Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
I'm very pleased to welcome back Jill Wine-Banks, former Watergate prosecutor, author of the memoir Watergate Girl. We haven't talked since the election, Jill. You and I both kind of didn't see the way things were going to work out now, did we?
We certainly predicted incorrectly. You and I and Barb McQuaid, my sister-in-law, from the podcast, #Sisters-in-Law, didn't get it right. We were pretty confident that Donald Trump would be a loser, but he was a winner, not by the margins that he is claiming. So let's get that fact out there. It's important that facts be known. And we didn't get it right. We were overly optimistic.
One thing that's going on today kind of concerns me. You know, the House Ethics Committee met for more than 2 hours behind closed doors to try to decide whether or not they were going to release the ethics report on Matt Gaetz. He's trying to say that because he's resigned from this Congress, it's a moot point and it should be buried. Though there is precedent, other people who've resigned from Congress still had their ethics reports released. So it's not like somebody's asking the committee to do something it's never done before. But according to the ranking Democrat who came out and talked to reporters, so far they're breaking along party lines on this, whether or not it should be released. She said that they decided today not to decide. They're going to meet again on December 5th. But here's the part that bothers me. Many of the people who call in and listen to this radio station get very frustrated with Democrats because it seems that we are not willing to be as passionate in opposition or defense of someone as the Republican Party. The ranking Democrat came out and it was just this straightforward, that we're breaking along party lines, there's no decision, we're going to meet again. She didn't say anything along the lines of, you know, my Republican colleagues are clearly afraid of Donald Trump, and they know that somebody who is vastly unqualified to do this job, they're afraid they're going to have to either sacrifice their careers or capitulate to Donald Trump. It was just this very sort of straightforward, this is what's happened. And then the Republicans, they're doing what they always do. Right now, J.D. Vance and Matt Gaetz are doing a personality tour, going from Capitol Hill. They're going from office to office to sit down with people to basically tell them why Matt Gaetz wouldn't be such a bad choice after all. So the Republicans, as always, are pedal to the metal, and Democrats are like, well, you know, this happened today, and we're going to meet again in December, and I'm not going to really say more than that. I get so frustrated with what seems to be a lack of passion, a willingness to be authentic from our party. Tell me I'm wrong. Please tell me you don't see it that way.
No, you don't want me to lie. I can't tell you you're wrong. I'm sorry. I want to, first of all, say your passion means I wish you were the ranking member. That would be a good thing because I think you're right on all these points, communication. And, you know, just sort of a little off topic, but the same thing is that one of the things that we've learned from this last election and from the follow-up interviews of people is that authenticity, passion, drove some of the voting. And isn't that people who voted for Trump also voted for AOC was because they perceived both as being honest and authentic. And even though, of course, the words out of Donald Trump's mouth are totally false, he was viewed as authentic, as was she. Mm-hmm. So I think you've hit on a very important point. You also mentioned that there is precedent for the release of a report after someone leaves the House. There is many examples of that having happened, but there is, in this case, even if there wasn't, there is a additional reason why it should be, and that is because most people who leave Congress under a scandal, and clearly this is part of it, they may do so to avoid having a bad report come out. But then they go away. They fade from the public view. This is someone who is not fading from public view. He is seeking a higher office. He is seeking to be the highest law enforcement officer of our country, the Attorney General of the United States, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. And anyone who is seeking that position must undergo a full exposition of all of their past. This report has information in it which I'm not saying it's true because I'm only basing this on leaks that we've heard, but some are statements from lawyers who represented witnesses who appeared before it. I believe that must be, true what they're saying, that they told the committee so that it's something that's within the committee's report. I think that no member of the Senate should vote to affirm his nomination without having heard and seen all of the evidence that the House Ethics Committee has put together. First of all, some of it could mean that there is a threat to national security. There are apparently, or at least allegedly, some statements about his drug use. That could be grounds for blackmail by some foreign adversary, if it's true. And so we need to know what that evidence is. Not we particularly, although that would be nice, but I think members of the Senate who have to vote. And, of course, Joan, that does take us to the question of whether they are going to actually vote.
Which is right where I was going to go. You said that senators are going to have to take a vote, but Donald Trump has asked them to go home, to go into recess, so that he can put whomever he wants in whatever job he wants with no kind of confirmation hearing. John Thune said somewhat tepidly a week ago that he really would like things done in the regular way. But he said it in a way that really didn't inspire me that he's going to go to the mat for it. And I think Donald Trump is doing this. I think he wants to crush the Senate right now, right out of the box. Yeah. He wants to break them, and he wants them to know that they are not important, that he's going to do what he wants, and he wants them to not stand in his way in any way, shape, or form. That's how I see it. Do you think the Republican members of Senate see this? Oh, I'm going to appoint the absolute worst person you can think of for every job, and I want you to basically just cede all of your authority and responsibility and let me do it. I don't know. Do you think John Thune sees that?
Oh, I'm sure that John Thune sees that. But that goes back to the question you raised earlier of whether any of them is willing to stand up to this invasion of our founding fathers' very basic principles of our democracy. The basic principle is that there will be checks and balances, that no branch will have total and complete unfiltered authority to do anything. And the role of the Senate under our Constitution is clearly laid out as the president can nominate and appoint with the advice and consent of the Senate, which means that they must vote to confirm any nominee. For them to walk away from and evade their constitutionally mandated responsibility would be horrible for checks and balances. It would be horrible for the administration going forward because, as you said, he has not picked necessarily qualified people. I mean, in what world would I say, oh, wow, Doug Burgum is such a good candidate. Oh, Marco Rubio, he's fine.
Hey, they're the tallest of a very short crew. I mean, you've got a guy who's already saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to make sure we stop fluoridating the water because, right. Because of conspiracy theories. And, people are saying RFK Jr.'s slogan is make polio great again. I mean, come on.
I hadn't heard that. Oh, no, I mean, I'm being kind when I say most of his nominees are horrendous. Obviously, Matt Gaetz is one of the top two. I would say if I had to pick another, and you're right, maybe it would have to be RFK, but for me, I'd have to say there are top three then, and if I keep thinking about it, I'll have more. But the third has to be his nominee for the Department of Defense. This person is not only unqualified by not having any managerial experience, by having been forced out of the military because he has white nationalist tattoos, which are barred by the military, and has paid off maybe two women for sexual encounters, but his lawyer has admitted that he paid one. He says, I didn't, I paid her off just to get rid of her, but I really am not guilty. It was a consensual relationship. It wasn't.
And she claims she was drugged. She claims that she has a big hole where she doesn't remember like 6 hours of the evening. She woke up in a hotel room. She got home and she started to have memories of being raped, and she went to the hospital. They did a rape test kit. They found semen, and I don't know if she asked them to do blood work. If you've been drugged, I don't know how long that stays in your system. But this isn't just, he said, she said. This is evil. She says, I was drugged by this man and raped by this man while I was drugged. It's nasty.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very nasty. And I have to mention one other thing. Having served in the Pentagon and made great strides during that time for women in the military, his position on women in the military, and today Defense Secretary Austin has come out saying women serve admirably and make us better when they serve in combat. This is a person, Hegseth, who is opposed to women serving in combat. Women have been in combat for decades now. There is no reason. It's such an outrage. It's such a part of the J.D. Vance, women should be pregnant and over a hot stove. That's the only function they have in the world. It's really a serious problem for him to be confirmed, one, or not confirmed and just put in place by a recess appointment. That is an evasion of, as we started, of the Senate's role, and it should not be permitted. And I think to something you alluded to that I agree with is that making Congress bend to his will at this point is the end of their oversight role, is the end of checks and balances. It is something really, really seriously terrible. And I hope that all of your listeners are focused on making sure that if they are in a state that has a Republican member, that they don't let this happen, that they make sure that the Senate does not waive its constitutionally mandated obligation to advise and consent.
And
they don't have to consent after they get an investigation.
I think John Thune sees what Trump is trying to do, but I think he's got to be very careful because I don't know how many Republicans in the Senate actually are Trump supporters. I would guess that more of them are more worried about what they could do to make sure they're primaried in the next election than they are worried about what his actual ideas are. But, Rick Scott from Florida, who was the third member in contention to be Senate Majority Leader, Rick Scott has made it clear that he will be a Donald Trump toady. You want us to go into recess? I'm your guy. I will put us into recess. I'll do whatever you want. So I think Mr. Thune has to be very careful that other Republicans in the Senate who are afraid of what Donald Trump might do to them in the midterm elections, that they will say, you know what, John, you're a great guy and you're probably right, but we're going to vote to put Rick Scott in your place because we just can't afford the grief Trump could bring our way in 2026. I worry about that. On his own, I think Thune would stand up to him, but he can't stand up to him if he doesn't have the support of the Republicans.
Well, he does have unique controls about what gets voted on and what doesn't get voted on, but that doesn't undermine at all what you're saying. He may get pressured by the members to say, you aren't going to be the leader anymore if you do this. And it's a big decision for him, but it's a bigger decision for our democracy for him not to allow this to happen. And could I just point out that it is completely unprecedented for a president to ask for Congress to go into recess solely for the purpose of his making recess appointments. And there is at least one glimmer of legal hope, which is there is a Supreme Court case that says that the vacancy must occur during the recess. So in other words, the vacancy is going to exist at 12:01 on January 20th. As soon as he's inaugurated, the vacancy exists. If it's not in recess before that, and he cannot make them go into recess before that, because the Senate is still controlled by the Democrats until that moment, the vacancy will not occur during the recess, and therefore it would be unlawful to try to use recess appointments.
Okay,
so
walk me through that again. Until January 20th is Inauguration Day. But isn't the new Congress is sworn in on January 3rd? Wouldn't the new Senate be sworn in that day as well?
Yes, the new Senate would be there, but the president can't order them to do it. So,
because he's not the president.
Because he's not the president. And the vacancy does not exist on that day anyway. So unless you see what I mean? The vacancy does not exist until the inauguration, when the cabinet is gone and the vacancies are there. So if assuming that no Democrat in office, that no Democrat who's holding a cabinet level position resigns before noon on the 20th, there are no vacancies to fill. And so they cannot go into recess until after the inauguration, and the vacancies will exist simultaneously. So it's a tricky, there's only a moment to argue about this, but the vacancy clearly does not exist after or during the recess. So it existed before the recess. They can't recess fast enough, is what I'm thinking. Or at least it's an argument that can be made. And the Constitution says that, let's look at why there are recess appointments allowed under the Constitution. And that's because in the 1700s, when you couldn't, just all be together instantaneously almost, there were travel problems, and there might be a vacancy that arose while Congress was in a legitimate recess, the holidays or the summer, and they didn't used to meet as year-round as Congress does now. And so sometimes there would be a vacancy that you really needed filled. The head of a big agency like the Pentagon or the Department of Justice, those need to have leaders. And so if you couldn't get Congress together to confirm the person the president chose, the president was allowed to appoint during a recess until the end of that congressional session. So for basically 2 years, assuming that it started at the beginning, for less if the vacancy arose in the last year of the session of Congress. That's why it existed. That reason doesn't exist if you call a fake recess solely to make a recess appointment. That's just wrong. And I'm not saying that Democrats haven't been outsmarted by this, thought, and that there's no way to change the Constitution. But I think this is such a clear evasion of the Constitution that maybe there will be Republicans in the Senate who will not agree to the end of checks and balances, and that's what they would be doing.
It certainly looks that way to me. And, I would ordinarily say a body like the Senate, because, of course, this isn't the House of Representatives. The Senate considers them the civilized branch of government, not those plebeians over in the House. We are the Senate, and we wear suits and ties, and we treat each other with dignity, and we have a certain measure of decorum that we abide by. I would never believe that the Senate would willingly give away its power. And maybe there's some hope in the fact that, Donald Trump is a lame duck president. I mean, this is his second term. He is ineligible for another term. And, maybe that will give them some measure of resolve. But they are so used to kowtowing. Mitch McConnell, who clearly hates Donald Trump, didn't speak to him for years. Donald Trump made fun of Mitch McConnell's wife in a real derogatory way. And Mitch McConnell, I'm endorsing Donald Trump. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. That's sort of the Republican Party that I feel exists today. And it makes me wonder if John Thune is going to tell all of the Republicans in the Senate, let's just get down on our knees and kiss the ring.
Well, it's true, but keep in mind the new statistics. The new reality is Republicans are the majority party. Independents are the second largest party, and Democrats are the minority party. We are the third most populated party. So they may be feeling quite empowered. And it's a terrifying thought to anyone who cares about the actual words of the Constitution. And, this Supreme Court has also kowtowed to the president in ways that I would have never thought possible. And so even though I've pointed to one Supreme Court case that says the vacancy must occur during the recess to have a valid recess appointment, being sort of thinking outside the box, it is possible that Congress could on its own adjourn, go into recess on, January 5th. Just right after on January 10th, whatever. They can, and then they would be in recess when he's inaugurated, and so there would be a vacancy upon, during a recess that would invalidate that particular law case. But maybe the court would see the devious, nefarious plotting that went into that and say you cannot create a vacancy or cannot validate a recess appointment by recessing for invalid purposes. But what confidence does anyone in this country have that the Supreme Court is not goal-oriented, that they won't do and reason to get to the result they want?
Speaking of the Supreme Court, Thomas and Alito both made allusions to the fact that if a Republican was elected to the White House, they might consider retiring. Do you think that'll happen?
I don't know, but I think that the answer is they may be forced into it for, to the extent that they can't. Obviously, they can't be forced because it is a lifetime appointment. But they may wish to do that while there is the chance of appointing their mirror image, but in a 40-year-old.
But will billionaire Harlan Crow still provide so much financial sustenance to Clarence Thomas if there's no longer anything Clarence Thomas can do for Harlan Crow? Clarence Thomas' personal underwriter, Harlan Crow?
Boy, that's such a good point, Joan. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he won't give in to it because he's enjoying his luxurious lifestyle. Yeah. And that is a possibility. But, let's think about, would Harlan Crow wish to have his legacy be that a 40-year-old is now on the court who thinks the same way that Justice Thomas does? And so maybe he could say, okay, I'll keep funding you, and I will fund this new person too. Maybe. I mean, I certainly wouldn't put it past him to do that. And, that would assure both Crow and Trump's legacy. I also, speaking of his legacy, if I could divert for 1 second, I interviewed for my new show, Just the Facts, on YouTube, Carolyn Maloney, who you may remember was a member of Congress from New York for 30 years, or maybe more than 30 years, and was one of the founders of the National Organization for Women and of ERA Now. And we were talking about strategies to get the Equal Rights Amendment to become an official part and an enforceable part of the Constitution. And after talking about some of the possible ways, I said, this may sound crazy, but what do you think about asking Donald Trump to do it and to appeal to his vanity, he could outdo Obama's legacy and Biden's legacy. He wants to help women, he said, whether we want it or not, by asking him to ask Congress to pass a joint resolution lifting the time ban and ordering that the archivist publish the amendment and make it an official part. And she actually thought that was a good idea. And so I am, once again, if Donald Trump is listening to you, I know that's unlikely, but maybe someone will tell him about your show and what was said. He could be a really important figure in the women's movement instead of our thinking of him and E. Jean Carroll. And
yeah, you know
others.
what, Jill? I think that's a noble idea. Good luck with that. I don't think you're going to have much success with that, but I love the fact that you have hope. We've got to get to a break. Jill, thank you so much for spending time with us. And
thank you for having me, Joan.
Yeah, let me know how that goes. Jill Wine-Banks.
I will. We're going to start a petition.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
We're going to take a break and return with Professor Joel Ostrow after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You may have seen a couple of things change in our relationship with Ukraine. We gave them some long-range missiles and said, you know what, you got to shoot them into Russia. You just go ahead and do that. There has been permission recently for using an anti-personnel mine. Joe Biden seems to be trying to give Ukraine more support in these final days of his presidency. Here to talk about that and some personal stuff is our good friend, political science professor Joel Ostrow. He also does, he's with Benedictine University. He also does the World Discord podcast. Hello, Joel. I know that you said that you had a friend that you wanted to talk about, a Russian journalist who died recently. Tell us about that, if you would.
Thank you so much, Joan. It means a lot to me, and I really appreciate it. The Russian journalist Ivan Trefilov died in exile in Riga. He was found dead in his apartment about 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to talk about the circumstances of his death, but I do want to say he was the news director for a radio station called Radio Svoboda, which means Radio Freedom. On a personal level, the English language is just lacking. Friend, he was like a brother. He lives in my heart. I love the man. He was part of a group of young journalists, and when I got to Russia to do my dissertation research on the Russian State Duma, the parliament, he was part of a group of parliamentary correspondents that welcomed me with open arms. And they did so because Vanya welcomed me, and he was truly revered by his peers. And Joan, you and I have talked privately. Not all journalists are open and generous in sharing with their sources and contacts. But I could not have done the work I did had I not been a part of that group. I could not have made the contacts I had if it weren't part of that group. And I really have always been in debt to and considered him like family. When Putin came to power, we all lost many common friends, more than I care to count, assassinated, almost all of them, investigative reporters, opposition politicians who are dedicated to trying to bring accountability, transparency, and democracy to Russia. They were idealists, and Putin squashed all of that. In 2014, Vanya went to Kiev with Putin's first incursion to Ukraine when they occupied Crimea and part of the Donbass. He went there as a news reporter for Radio Svoboda. And then because of the repetition of attacks and raids on Radio Svoboda's studios, arrests and harassment of their editors, seizure of all of this violence against the press that came from Putin and still does, Radio Svoboda moved its operation to Riga, and Vanya subsequently became the news director there. He lived there alone, separated from his wife and his beautiful daughter. And all of his friends and I have 100% conviction that had those conditions not been imposed on him, he'd still be alive. So in no sense can one say that he was assassinated. He's still a victim of Putin's dictatorship and violent dictatorship. And this is sort of relevant to the last conversation that you had and conversations that I had, frustrating ones throughout the campaign, of people who poo-pooed Trump's statements, the warnings, Project 2025, all of it is not real. And they probably still are in denial. Trump is an authoritarian. That is without question. He's not an ideologue, but the people around him are fascists. And what he is doing now with these nominees, all of them, with maybe one exception, the one person he is suggested for CIA director, none of the rest have qualifications for the posts in which they're being nominated. This is by design. Putin also appointed incompetents and lemmings to positions throughout the government and then the economy. And it is essential to take it seriously. No, the Senate is not going to do anything to stand in his way. And rather than pretend that there is some kind of hope or to let ourselves be surprised later, anyone who cares about democracy in this country, because you yourself acknowledge the Supreme Court has already abolished the rule of law in this country. They've put the presidents above the law. By definition, we are no longer a republic, which means, in the modern sense, we're no longer a democracy. Trump has every intention of destroying the institutions of our government. The evidence of that was in his speeches and the documents during the campaign, and now the people that he is naming to office. And when that happens, bloodshed follows, violence follows, not from the opposition, but from the government. And the echoes of how Putin came to power and what he did in power, the program that he had outlined, it's all chillingly similar. And nobody's really taking it seriously enough. My friend died in exile alone because he was a journalist who wanted to hold government accountable. Trump has promised that will be the future of journalists in this country who try to hold him accountable, who try to stand in the way of the fascist Republican agenda.
It's interesting that you talk about his picks, because I was trying to figure out why Donald Trump would pick people who were, in some cases, insultingly poorly suited for the jobs. And I thought maybe it was his way of grinding the Senate under his boot. Not only do I want you to go into recess and allow me to do this, but you're going to not even be able to tell yourself that you're doing it for people who are really good at their jobs. You're going to know that you're doing it to put in these people who are horrible.
And then what he's going to do, if the Senate doesn't approve any of them, he's going to put them in position anyway.
As an acting director,
because I know he can stop him. No, he can name them whatever he wants. Who's going to stop him?
Well, I know if he announces that somebody is, instead of the transportation secretary, they're the acting transportation secretary, that means that person can actually function as the transportation secretary without ever being officially confirmed.
Trump doesn't care about the rules or the norms. He's going to do what he wants to do. So if they reject Tulsi Gabbard, he's going to say, Tulsi Gabbard is my director of national intelligence. The end. He's going to go. He's going to ignore any attempt to check his power until someone forces the Constitution to be enforced. And I see no evidence of that happening because
not with this current Supreme Court. No.
So this unknown to most people in the West journalist who died, he wasn't shot or pushed out of a building or poisoned, but he's still a victim, and I fear that these kinds of situations, these kinds of tragedies, are in our future, and it's not exaggeration; it's real.
We need to take a break, Joel. When we come back, I want to talk to you about our recent our recent relaxing of the rules over what we're sending to Ukraine and how Ukraine can use it. I'm talking to Benedictine University professor Joel Ostrow. He also co-hosts a podcast called World Discord. We'll be right back after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
In the final days of his presidency, Joe Biden seems to be relaxing some of the rules that have been imposed on Ukraine with what they can do with American munitions. There's an Army tactical missile system that they're now being told if they want to use those missiles to attack Russian soil, they can. Anti-personnel landmines have also been authorized. Which was not something that was permitted before, to try to keep Russians from advancing any further in the east. What do you think of these changes in our policy?
What's the line that's often misattributed to Churchill? America always comes to the aid of countries in need, but often too late. Throughout the last 2.5 years, every weapon request that Ukraine has made, the United States has hemmed and hawed for months. First it was Patriot defenses, and then it was tanks, and then it was the ATACMS and HIMARS rocket systems. Then it was the F-16s, and now it's permission to use these weapons in a way that are useful. First of all, these are not long-range missiles. It drives me nuts. Everyone's reporting them as long-range missiles. They are short-range missiles. They have a range of less than 200 miles.
The Washington Post just calls it the Army Tactical Missile System.
TACMS, the Army Tactical, it's short range. It's almost a battlefield weapon, but 200 miles. What the purpose is to... So what Russia's doing is launching these glide bombs, and these glide bombs can go 200 to 500 miles. And so they're launching them from
there's
Russian
no motor? Or what is a glide bomb? I've never heard that.
Yeah, they put them on airplanes, and then they let them go, and they glide to their destination. So they're quiet, they're hard to find, they're hard to shoot down.
There's no heat signature, to track.
So these are the things that are doing the most damage because the air defenses have trouble with them. But we know, and Ukraine knows where they're located. But the problem is Russia had them, the planes that hold these things, out of range of anything that Ukraine had, other than the drones, which are not as effective. So these rockets have about a 200-mile range, and they're going to be used exclusively, one, to go after those systems that Russia's using to hit Kiev and the Kharkiv region in particular, but also to try to support the movement to take over the Donetsk region, but also to allow Ukraine to defend Ukrainian territory. If the territory that Russia occupies is being considered Russian territory in Ukraine, then the territory Ukraine occupies is now Ukrainian territory in what was Russia. And Ukraine has the right to defend it. And Russia has now received up to 10,000, and some are saying it will go up to 50,000 North Koreans. These ATACMS are going to be used to destroy the barracks and the bases where the training and the assembly of those soldiers is happening. I predict there's going to be a lot of dead Koreans thanks to this new permission, and we can attribute the timing of this permission to the deployment of these North Koreans and their imminent deployment to the battlefield around the Kursk region.
If these North Koreans are killed in large numbers, do you think North Korea will simply replace them, or will it be, hey, you didn't take care of the first batch, I'm not sending you another batch?
North Korea seems to have about as much care for its people as Putin has for the Russian people, which is, my answer to your question is probably yes. They are certainly already reported to be unreliable, having arrived in Russia and discovered an open internet. Apparently, porn sites are noticing quite a lot more traffic than they had been prior. These are not going to be your most disciplined soldiers, nor the best trained, and certainly not the best armed. But the permission to use these rockets, number one, Ukraine doesn't have very many of them, because, number two, the United States doesn't have very many of them. They are short range. They're not going to hit the Kremlin. They're not going to hit nuclear sites or anything like that. They're strictly going to be going after the same thing that Ukraine has been going after. The logistical, like the oil depots, ammunition depots, airfields, things like that are supporting Russian operations in the east of Ukraine and increasingly elsewhere in Ukraine. As for the anti-personnel mines, this is new, but the way Russia is sacrificing its personnel, losing about 1,500 to 2,000 soldiers a day as they advance roughly a kilometer a day in Donetsk. Ukraine is also suffering casualties and is at a loss of armaments, deficiency of armaments. Russia can overwhelm with numbers, as we're seeing. These anti-personnel mines will make it much harder for the Russian ground troops to advance, and are sorely needed.
Were the North Korean troops, was that just, hey, because Vlad, I really like you, I'm going to send you thousands of soldiers? Or was it the fact that Russia is having a hard time getting more military to fight in Ukraine?
Both, and we don't know exactly what the promises are that Russia has made to North Korea. There was a report, I think it was in the New York Times recently, that was quite skeptical that Russia was going to follow through on its promises to North Korea. I would be shocked if they did follow through on their promises.
Do we know, but we don't know what the promises were?
Maybe financial, maybe oil and gas. And those are the best guesses.
So,
and it amounts to the same thing, because the oil and gas is what is financing Russia's war. So, it's defying of sanctions and finding ways around them. So.
Yeah, and I know you explained when we talked before about the way that Russia's getting around these sanctions in a very complex, well, we're going to move it here, then we're going to add some of this, and then we're going to resell it, and we're going to relabel it.
Right.
Take a step back. These new moves by the Biden administration, while we might say, sure would have been nice if he'd have done that 2 years ago, how do things stand now? Because I know that there was, in the Washington Post, they also did an article about how the United States is closing its embassy in Kyiv, and some of other countries are at least temporarily closing theirs, because now that they're allowed to use these missiles on Russian soil, the fear is that there'll be retaliation and the embassy personnel will be at risk. So...
No, the increased Russian attacks had already begun. The intelligence was clear that in advance of the heavy snows, Russia was going to pummel Kiev again, like it has each of the last couple of winters. Not just Kiev, but Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa, possibly Lviv. All of those cities are going to come under increasing bombardment over the next few weeks. Ukraine lacks sufficient air defenses. Again, like we're not manufacturing them or sending them fast enough for Ukraine to defend itself against the barrages that Russia sends. Part of the idea is to give Ukraine time to. They have developed their own longer range missiles and rockets, and they're producing them rapidly. And I think the hope is that they will be able to arm themselves more quickly in fairly soon, and that if there's going to be a game changer, it will be that. In the meantime, it is quite likely that Britain and France now will also give the permission to use their versions of the ATACMS missiles, but in no case is Ukraine going to have more than a few hundred of these, certainly fewer than 1,000. So there's really little damage in the end that they're going to be able to do to Russia. They have to be very strategic in how they use them, and any talk of Russian retaliation against NATO or the U.S. is really kind of silly. That's
really.
Yeah, this is not that big of an escalation. It's something that Ukraine needs. But Ukraine has already been using drones that it has developed and it has received to go after these exact same sites in Russia. This will make it more effective, but Ukraine's not going to be targeting anything that it hasn't already been targeting.
I read somewhere that the people of this country should take hope from the people of Ukraine, because look what they have done and look how they have weathered this horrible, horrible situation with Russia. And we're supposed to take from it that if they can keep Russia at least at bay, then we can get through the next 4 years of Donald Trump. That we should look to them and be inspired by them. They've got it worse than us, and they're not giving up, and they're continuing to fight. A little bit of optimism.
The Ukrainian people are pretty united in their opposition to Russia. So there's I don't quite see the analogy there, grasping for hope, and I understand that. As I said at the beginning of our talk, I think it's much more important that we be clear and open-eyed and understand that the intentions of those who are coming to power are ugly. And talk of using military on the streets to round up Americans, to deport American citizens, or worse. Believe what they say.
Yes, I do. Joel, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm very sorry about your friend. Please accept my condolences. Obviously, that's going to do it for me. We are out of time. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez is going to be up next. I will see you tomorrow at 2. Richard will be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow. He's going to be talking to Simon Parkin, author of The Forbidden Garden, Botanists of Besieged Leningrad and Their Impossible Choice. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Have a great evening, my friends. Happy holidays. Good night.